Welcome to the East Peak podcast. Today I have guest Raf Garcia, friend, former CTO, and co-founder of edtech company Clever. Welcome, Raf.
Thanks, Stuart. Good
Okay,
to good to chat with you.
awesome. Well, I think as I continue to interview others on this podcast, it'll probably primarily be with operators on the go-to-market side, but I thought it'd be really interesting and fun to start with you, someone who's kind of on the other side of the house from the typical sales, marketing, and sales ops people that I'll likely be speaking with more frequently. So, with that, would you mind maybe introducing yourself? And I know you're still working with Clever on an advisory basis, but maybe explain a little bit about what Clever is and yeah, a background about yourself.
Yeah, so Clever, at a high level, we help schools with account management and single sign-on. So giving administrators kind of tools to create accounts, manage logins for teachers and students in their district. So yeah, we serve about 25 million teachers and students in that way, primarily in the U.S. But yeah, we started the company in 2012. It was me and two friends of mine from college, and we sold it in 2021 to a Norwegian company, Kahoot, and yeah. I kind of took a step back beginning of this year to kind of think about what comes next and also just kind of see what life is like without the stress of uh, being a founder for 11 years now. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And yeah, I guess other than that, I'm a dad of three kids and live in Cincinnati. We moved here from San Francisco a few years ago to be closer to family. So yeah,
Fantastic, and definitely some well-earned time off between gigs. So very
yeah,
cool. All right, well, you know, part of the reason I wanted to speak with you today is, you know, we're out of this zero interest rate phenomenon environment and this bubbly churn that we had for several years, particularly, 2020, 2019 onwards. And you guys, I think, actually executed really well this dream that a lot of businesses are trying to aggressively pivot towards. So, to my understanding, is you guys really only raised about 40 or $43 million along your journey. And at least according to Crunchbase, you guys had an exit somewhere between 400 and $500 million, so a 10x return. And it seems like you haven't actually raised for maybe I think 6 or 7 years. So
yeah.
tell us a little bit about like what went into that. Was that a function of just like the total addressable market and hitting the S curve in your business, or was that a conscious decision to be more conservative with your burn?
Yeah, I think we raised yeah, three rounds, basically a seed round, A round, and a B round, um, about a year apart. 3 years into like 1 year into the company, 2 years and 3 years into the company, and I think the primary drivers were just seeing the company growing quickly and just like kind of fueling the ambition we had for how big the company could be. Um, but once we kind of reached a stable point where we could fund our growth and the hiring we wanted to do from the revenue we were producing, um, there didn't really we didn't really need to raise another round. And I think the challenge we ended up having is, I think this is typical for lots of startups, is you have your core business that you start out with, it grows, it grows, it grows, and then eventually it gets to a growth rate that is good, but not like um, gonna take over the world great.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you're growing at 20% a year, whereas before you're like doubling every year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you get to that point and you have stable revenue and you can kind of fund your own operations, um, the mindset kind of shifts to like find a new product, find a new um, kind of growth curve to get on. And if it clicks, then think about raising money, or if you have to.
Hmm.
And so for us, we explored lots of different products. We ended up essentially just expanding the core product that we do kind of over time, and that you know revenue from that has steadily grown to the point I think now uh, Clever is over like 50 million a year run rate. So and we thought it would, the core product in the early days, we're like, oh, there's no way this gets over like
Hmm.
10 or 20. Like we need to figure out something else to get us to the next level. But it's been steadily growing. And like, I think if you attach yourself to a market that is growing and you continue to deliver stuff into that market, like, you know, you can steadily grow for a long period of time before you run out of stuff to do.
Great. Well, inspiration to all these businesses that have been given marching orders to, have reasonable, structured growth. So love it. Cool. So maybe we'll pivot back to the business and maybe kind of how you landed on that idea and navigated the idea maze in a second. But maybe pivoting to just kind of like some personal background. I believe that the way we're raised, where we grow up in the country or elsewhere, amongst other things, like has a pretty big impact in terms of your approach to business, the career trajectories you take, and more. So it's my understanding that your parents actually emigrated to the U.S. From Venezuela, and then you grew up in the greater, I think, Chicago area.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you think that had maybe on your academic path and your eventual choice and decisions as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest impact it had was the fact that they chose to move here to the U.S.
Hmm.
My life would be much different growing up in Venezuela. So that's kind of the biggest thing. I'm like, it could have been very different for me. And then I think beyond that is really, my parents, especially my mom, sacrificed a lot to like drive me 45 minutes each way to a school growing up, and like figuring out a way for me to get like tuition, like scholarships, when she was eventually a single mom, and we had basically uh, no no money. And yeah, I think from that point forward, we moved to Naperville, which is one of the better school districts in the Chicago area, and so like just continued focus on just like getting me and my sister to have all these opportunities, like from an educational point of view.
Hmm.
And for, I was super lucky that my mom cared deeply about that. So I think that's the biggest impact it had. And I think eventually, what that translated to is, you know, going to Harvard, going to places where, I was challenged academically, surrounded by people that were really good at lots of things, and kind of forced me to, you know, fulfill the potential I had, and really push myself.
Hmm.
And, eventually, you know, my two co-founders are, good friends from college, and, professionally speaking, it was, it was, it was awesome to be surrounded by all these smart people in college that, become lifelong friends and eventual business partners. So, yeah, I think my parents, it's the biggest impact was kind of the focus on education, and just, yeah, trying to give me the opportunity to succeed here in the U.S. and not in Venezuela.
Makes sense.
Um,
What led you to decide to actually graduate from Harvard instead of dropping out your freshman year, like all the cool kids?
right. You know what? So we didn't start Clever until 2012, which was
Hmm.
a few years after we had all graduated. And honestly, I felt like that was the right thing to do from a just like, go out, have it like go out into the real world, get a job, kind of realize what it is that makes you tick in a professional environment. Because when you leave college, you're mainly just averaging what your friends are doing and what
Mm-hmm.
people of your typical background or major are doing. You're not really driven by much of a principled, like, this is what I want to do with my life approach. So I think having a few years, I went to work for a high frequency trading company in Chicago and got really good mentorship from really amazing programmers and systems engineers and learned a ton. And after 3 years there, I felt like I was, you know, I had gained all these skills that I could now apply to starting my own company and like building out systems from scratch. And um, I think that was key. And it also gave, my co-founder Dan, who's kind of the domain expert in education, it gave him 3 years to teach in a classroom in Denver and understand the problem that eventually is what we ended up solving. So I think, yeah, just going out into the real world, getting some skills and domain
Mm-hmm.
expertise is pretty valuable. And yeah, didn't have any of that, in before graduation.
Totally. At the risk of going on a tangent, what was kind of the edge or like alpha this firm was trying to pursue? Like, what was their investment
Yeah,
thesis?
so it was all algorithmic stuff. So we were training models on just data we got from every single exchange across the whole world. So there was no specialty geographically. It was mainly just find data feeds and connectivity to as many things as possible,
Mm-hmm.
run a bunch of back tests and models on and simulations on tons of things, see what
Mm-hmm.
sticks. Um, and I really think the edge was in that infrastructure for testing
Mm-hmm.
ideas, adjusting them as market conditions evolve over time. Nothing works forever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then having just world-class connectivity to exchanges so that you're the fastest to react to when things happen. So yeah, I mean, Jump is an incredibly successful trading firm, and they've grown a ton since I've left. They have tons of smart people and lots of alpha. Um, but yeah, I was on a team that we were primarily trading interest rate futures,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, eventually it came out many years later that there was a big scandal that a lot of investment banks were manipulating that market
Is it the
pretty extensive.
LIBOR
The
or yeah?
LIBOR scandal, exactly. So that was somewhat frustrating to read about after the
Mm-hmm.
fact, but it is what it is. But yeah, it was fun. It was learned a ton, and but yeah, it wasn't what I wanted to really dedicate my life to.
Makes sense. Did you get a cameo in Michael Lewis's Flash Boys or no mention?
I mean, it was no mention, but that was one of those moments. I mean, I remember that day pretty vividly, the flash crash, and the eventual kind of brief backlash against high frequency trading, culminating in that book. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it kind of it was one of those moments for me where I was deep in the weeds. I understood what we were doing, and I believed it was perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
But to read that book, read things that were being written in the press, it really kind of challenged my belief in like a lot of reporting, honestly. And
Mm.
I think a lot of people actually now are realizing with Michael Lewis's book about Sam Bankman-Fried that maybe he isn't the most
That's right.
clear-eyed financial reporter.
Seems to maybe yeah, I got a little too close I think with that
Yep,
one. So
yep.
okay, great. Um, yeah, that I think you're kind of talking about the Gilman amnesia effect. I don't know if you're
Hmm.
familiar with that, but for the listeners, if you haven't heard about that, it's the idea that you're going around and you follow a given reporter or a newspaper of record, then you finally stumble across a topic that you happen to be an expert in, and they get it backwards or totally upside down. And then you go on to read the next article and you completely forget that the thing you actually could verify was completely wrong, but this next topic somehow must be right. So
Yep.
okay, great. Well, thanks for indulging me down that early career path. So, Cool. So you and your founders actually had the opportunity to like touch grass a little bit outside the Harvard yard and have some surface area with the real world and encounter some problem sets. So how did you kind of like decide on kind of like the ed tech space? Like what was it that made you want to go deeper or pursue that area?
Yeah, it was pretty clear to me and my other co-founder Tyler towards like 2011, beginning of 2012, that we wanted to start some kind of company. We were both ready to leave our jobs. We had both kind of gotten some expertise and skills from our jobs. And it was really about finding what to work on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was flying out to San Francisco. We were tinkering on ideas, um, and eventually Dan, my uh, education background co-founder, he came out to San Francisco for some like hackathon weekend, hackathon,
Mm-hmm.
and he stayed with Tyler and started talking to him about all these things he was frustrated with. And it was just kind of this perfect seeding of the idea of like, oh, here Tyler and Raf were trying to think about ideas to work on, and here's Dan, our friend, who's like serving up like this problem to work on a silver platter, um, and is like a super talented domain expert that knows exactly what he wants the solution to look like. Um, so it kind of was pretty straightforward from that point, where um, we were young, uh, fairly unencumbered by responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, we met up, uh, the three of us, one weekend in San Francisco. I came out from Chicago, Dan from Denver, where he was teaching. Tyler was there already, and we holed ourselves up in. Tyler got some suite at the Fairmont on points,
Okay.
and we holed up ourselves for a weekend and kind of cranked out a prototype of something that eventually became kind of the first version of Clever. And once we kind of knocked out a little bit of that technical uncertainty, or just like scratched the surface a bit, that's
Mm-hmm.
when we kind of knew, okay, there's something here. Um, it's worth pulling this thread. And so that was like January of 2012. We all
Mm-hmm.
kind of set in motion, kind of resigning our current jobs, and I moved out in February and started working uh, on the company. So yeah, it was kind of a coincidental but very easy decision to make at the end of the day, when two people and trust are available to work on something, and one of them has a problem that he knows very well, and you all three have different skills that you kind of bring to the table.
Very cool. So in that that kind of like mini hackathon weekend, like what role did the Tonga Room, the famous tiki bar downstairs, play in the basement?
It did not play any role really. We were in the Ralston suite, and that's just forever been in Clever lore, at least among the founders, as like this special place. And then eventually Jeff Ralston was one of our advisors at Y Combinator, and he invested in the company. So there's uh, lots of Ralstons involved in our
There
history.
you go. Nice. Cool. So this kind of navigating the idea maze, like this occurred before you submitted a Y Combinator?
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay. What
by the time we applied to Y Combinator, it was a few months in, and we already had commitments from a couple of customers. We were working with Dan's school district, so we had some early traction, and and yeah, we were kind of pretty set on this idea. But I mean, there's never, you go into YC and now you're surrounded by like 80, in our case, 80 companies that are all working on different things. And um, we certainly had ideas of like, oh man, do we really want to be working on this? Is this the one idea that we want to go with?
mm-hmm.
So we had a few moments like that. But ultimately we went all in on the idea that we started with. And yeah,
So that's pretty like mature though for the modal YC batch, right? Like to have a customer even and kind of it because a lot of times they kind of are like whipping together almost like vaporware, like a lot of times, right?
Yeah, I mean it varies. I mean some people go. I would say the vast majority, 99% of people apply to YC with an idea that they're working on,
Mm-hmm.
but then a good chunk of them pivot or change,
Mm-hmm.
probably 30 to 50% if I were to guesstimate, either during the batch or after the batch. Uh, yeah, I mean, startups are a game of iterating and exploring, so it's kind of a natural process. But we were lucky enough to kind of uh, figure something out that mostly worked. Like I actually went back to our YC application recently, and basically what we laid out was exactly what we ended up doing. um, so I think that was just, to Dan's credit, he knew exactly what we should build and had a
Nice.
very clear idea that we pursued, and it ended up um, working out. You know,
Very cool. So yeah, 2012, like kind of that era was probably super special. YC still like was Paul and Jessica still involved, or was Sam taken over at that point?
yeah, Paul was still definitely involved, and yeah, some of my best memories from that time were our meetings with him. You know, at that stage, your ambitions are just like they could go anywhere. They can
Hmm.
go in any direction, and the ups and downs are huge. Like any day the company could just evaporate, or there's existential risks around every corner. Um, but if we ever needed like a pump up of like, we're really feeling down about the company, or like, maybe it was actually a lot of times before we went out and fundraised. If we ever needed a way to kind of really imagine the maximum thing that Clever could be, like office hours with Paul Graham was like the solution to that problem. Like you
Nice.
go on a walk with him for 30 minutes and like tell him what you're working on, and he'll tell you how it's going to take over the world. Like he can connect those dots. He can kind of like get those creative juices flowing in a way that is really unique. So yeah, it was a great experience for us. I mean, again, it's one of those things that in hindsight, I think maybe I could only do as a 25-year-old, but 3 months of just like intense focus on
Mm-hmm.
making something work, surrounded by lots of other smart people that are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a really powerful experience,
I bet.
because yeah, it just brings out you know the best in you, and at the end of the program you have demo day, so it's this big opportunity to raise money. So you want to make the most of that. So there's just like all these incentives driving you to like do good work and do it quickly. So yeah, it was a great experience, and it certainly accelerated our trajectory by a lot.
Very cool. In recent years, I know some people have been like more critical of Y Combinator, saying that the take is like quite large, and like just some like adversarial outcomes and effects and things like that occur. But I've been hearing really good things since Gary Tan has been taking over the wheel. Like, do you stay
Yeah,
connected with them and have any thoughts about kind of the juice being worth a squeeze or not in terms of
yeah,
the position they take?
yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to. I mean, if you were to measure it kind of objectively, things you'd want to look at are like how successful is the average YC company versus
Mm-hmm.
non-YC companies, and I think everything you see in that realm just proves that YC companies are like way more successful than non-YC companies. I think I remember seeing some stats around like unicorns produced, like percentage of YC companies that become unicorns, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's pretty clear, objectively speaking, that YC produces good companies. So in that in that light, I feel like they could probably, and also given how many people apply to YC, I feel like the demand to be a YC company is extremely high. So I'm not surprised that they're able to command a
Mm-hmm.
high price of entry. and it seems worth it. I mean, I think it was worth it for us. I think if you look at the results of, um, you know, broadly across all YC companies, it's worth it. So, um, yeah, I think they've created a very special place that attracts the best companies, and um, they can they are in a good position to ask a lot of for in terms of equity and um, you know that kind of stuff.
Makes sense. Okay, so you eventually do move out to the Bay Area. You make a go of this full time. Maybe could we kind of talk about maybe post YC and maybe even after your first raise, like selling into state and local education as well as like the federal and state government is like notoriously challenging. And I personally have been in SaaS sales operations and like leading teams for 12 years, but I've always been a little wimpy about wanting to touch that space just because it like healthcare and some other hard markets, it has some reputational challenges in terms of go to market.
Yeah.
How did you kind of find like the initial going once you had like a viable product and you were going to market? Was there anything that you really were taken aback by, or what was it? Yeah,
Yeah.
what was the general motion?
Yeah, so I think Clever has a pretty unique business model. So Clever is free to schools, and we
Mm,
charge edtech developers kind of a per school licensing fee. So like
mm-hmm,
um, it really simplified our sales motion into a B2B sale to a software company.
mm-hmm,
Um, and then on top of that, it kind of uh, activated these companies, these software companies that we were uh, selling Clever to, were then motivated to go out to all of their school customers and say, hey, like I just purchased this thing Clever that is going to like make our lives easier implementing uh, this software in the classroom. Like, please sign up for Clever. It's free.
mm-hmm,
So now we had activated, the sales forces and marketing departments
mm-hmm.
of our software company customers to go out and get Clever installed in all the schools that they work with. Um, so we kind of piggybacked upon their relationships with schools by making the sale to the software company and getting building trust with them and like you know giving them something that they really wanted to go out and use with all their customers. Um, and that basically we were able to avoid having to directly sell to schools for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Eventually we're out there, you know, especially with larger districts. We have a success team that like works with some of the largest districts, and now we sell some products directly to districts. So that kind of has changed a little bit over time, but at its core, Clever, the go-to-market has been powered by a simple B2B sale to a software company that then goes out and like advocates for Clever in every school that they operate in, which is kind of what was the main driver of our growth. Because then the school
Mm-hmm.
turns around to all their software providers and says, hey, I just started using this Clever thing. Like you should get on it. And now like we have inbound from the other vendors that they use.
It's a hell of a network effect.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah,
Awesome. So, eventually, as you move away from kind of like general founding partner, you eventually take on the mantle of CTO.
yeah,
And I know that different businesses, particularly like different industries and stuff, the CTO can have like different kinds of remits. So, what was kind of like your general charter as the business progressed when you were formally CTO?
yeah. So in the early days, it was shipping code and honestly really taking a lot of direction and listening to sales calls and in the early days we were all in one room. I was listening to Tyler and Dan make
Mm-hmm.
sales calls and start to like promise things that were still in development, your typical kind of thing. And that was honestly like that was awesome. I think
Mm-hmm.
just being able to be in those conversations and see kind of the feedback that we were getting kind of ambiently. I was like, I had my
Mm-hmm.
headphones on, I was trying to like focus, but um, was really great. But as the team grew, you know, we first thing you or typically add is engineers. So I quickly kind
Mm-hmm.
of within a year, I'd say I was primarily managing, and eventually, when we were about 20 engineers, I kind of had it enough, and we hired a VP of engineering, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, gave him all these reports, and went back to uh, to coding, which was great. And
Mm-hmm.
from that point forward, I kind of bounced between different kind of projects, and eventually led our core infrastructure team. So
Mm-hmm.
basically developing or working with the team and eventually just managing the team that works on kind of making sure Clever has good uptime and that like engineers within Clever have really good tools to make changes and deploy things safely and just be super productive. So it was a good, I think at a high level, you know, as a founder and CTO, I really felt driven to find where are the technical problems that like I can have the biggest impact given my knowledge of the history and systems. That was a great, you know, operating at that level of like the core infrastructure that underlies everything that we do was a great way to find problems in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you were you an early adopter of any kind of new modern architectures or anything like that? Or
Yeah, we were fairly uh, probably too early on like the Docker
mm-hmm.
train.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
R.I.P.
yeah, we yeah, I mean, we were giving talks at Docker meetups back in 2013 and
Mm-hmm.
um, using it in production, and which was fine. I mean, we I think it ended up being perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the world is organized around containers now, and so,
Mm-hmm.
but it did lead to some misfires in terms of like things that we use to manage all that, and the systems now, if we were to rebuild everything today, would look a lot different, I think.
Totally.
And But that's just the nature of the game. I mean, lots of decisions you make at the time are correct, technically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and you later, you know, realize, oh, it could have been a little bit better if we did this. Or nowadays, there's new things that we could have used, so it's like we would do it differently today. But you know, it is what it is.
Kubernetes or something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean
So
that's exactly it. It's all
yeah.
these different frameworks for we evaluated Kubernetes at multiple points in
Mm-hmm.
time when it first came out, and um, we actually didn't adopt it. We went with um, Amazon's ECS
Mm-hmm.
service, which ended up actually working out well for us. I think a lot of people like the hype curve on Kubernetes has kind of come back to like, like dread
Yeah.
and
Trough of
regret.
despair,
Yeah,
according to
despair.
Gartner. Yeah.
So I think we avoided, over investing in
Yeah. Yeah.
something very complex and not something that would, and we ended up with something perfectly fine, which is, an AWS product that, isn't as hot as Kubernetes, but
Mm-hmm.
has a human support team that like we can ask questions about, and
Right.
doesn't change very frequently and is pretty straightforward.
I don't know what a node is still at this point. I'm afraid to ask. Just kidding. So great. So pivoting away from kind of like your tech stack and the like. So as you've grown and you have like more specialized remit, obviously something similar happened on the go-to-market side of the house. So when you partnered with kind of your salespeople and marketing partners and others, what did you as a more technical leader like admire or kind of think of as like best practices? Like what really struck you as okay, this is what good looks like, and I want to see more of this because I think on the go-to-market side of the house, it can almost be like adversarial sometimes in terms of conflicts over product roadmaps and where we see bottlenecks. And there's this feeling that sometimes maybe the engineering team is a little distance from the customer, like they want to build something that's cool and maybe not monetizable. Like,
Yeah.
what really did that perspective from your side look like back
Yeah,
then?
so one of the teams I initially kind of embedded myself in after hiring a VP of engineering was our partner engineering team, which is like kind of like customer success, but specifically
Mm.
for the technical people at our technical customers.
Mm-hmm.
Since Clever at its core, you need to do a technical integration to have it work. Um, and I think that really opened my eyes to kind of the day-to-day challenges of like, you know, uh, a success team that is working with a very technical product that has to manage. There's like a huge element of like project management and like working through timelines and like trying to get another company to like develop something, which is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then responding to crises. It was another thing that I just like. It's a whole world of a stressful world of like problems that your customers come to you that most engineering teams are fairly insulated from, that I was kind of on the front lines of. Um, there was one partner of ours, I remember pretty vividly, was having this like crisis during back to school, and
Mm-hmm.
me, another engineer, and someone from our success team, you know, literally like flew out there and like spent two all-nighters in like like middle of New Jersey, just like working through problems with this customer. And those kind of experiences really just drive home, the importance of what you're building, and like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, I thought it was a great experience to kind of feel customer pain and feel pain myself on those trips. So yeah, that was eye opening to me, and yeah, I think at the end of the day, it was something that I tried to take back to the rest of the team, and you know make sure that the engineering team feels some of that. But uh, yeah, it's important. I think that you know you can't just throw something over the wall to your success team and
Mm-hmm.
and say have a good day. You gotta feel kind of the bugs and rough edges yourself.
Makes sense. Yeah, I love that. There's it just like I think anything like a priori is just it's never gonna really map out. I think just like getting there, touching grass, like seeing how it actually interacts in the real world is a game changer. So,
Yep.
okay, great. So, kind of maybe pivoting a little bit. So, you left the Bay Area before it was cool. Um, so, you grew up in the Chicago area. Obviously, had some formative years in the Boston area as an undergraduate, and then a long stint in San Francisco. So now you are in Ohio. What has moving to Ohio? How has that like affected you, or maybe changed your perspective as a one-time and maybe future founder, and also like remote work as part of that? Like, what has your
Yeah.
experience been?
Yeah. I think it's you know when you start a company, I think um, you really come to value the experience of being a small team in the
Mm-hmm.
same room, kind of what I described before. Like everyone is kind of, you can turn around and like hear a sales call. You can turn around and like talk about um, you know, what we should be building. Can turn around and like yell at your engineering intern to like do this thing. Um, so I think for me, I kind of came into moving here, and eventually COVID, which hit and a little bit after we moved here and everyone went remote. I came into that with this strong kind of warm spot in my heart for like the early days where we are like in
Mm-hmm.
person and just like interacting with like zero latency on everything. And I think that has really kind of biased my view. And it has been reinforced just by like, I don't really enjoy being fully remote. I really need that
Hmm.
in-person interaction. But I think it's highly personal based off of just like the history of, starting this company. Um, if I were to think about starting another company, I think my default would be to do what I know, and like um, try and find some way to be in person, whether it's
Hmm.
commuting to SF Monday through Friday, or like doing something here in Cincinnati if I can find the right team. So I think that's where I would gravitate towards. But yeah, I would love to see people figure out new ways to recreate that in a remote world. But
Totally.
being remote since 2020 or 2019 when I moved here um, has not been like amazing. I haven't like
Hmm.
loved it. I mean, I love Cincinnati. Don't get me wrong; like it's the best place for us to be. But yeah, if I were to start another company, I think I would want to do it in person, and I think SF and the Bay Area is still the best place to do it.
Totally. Yeah, I definitely like empathize with that. I think like a lot of my formative experiences in sales, it's just like the bandwidth, that kind of like Shannon limit is so much bigger in person, and you can hear people behind your shoulder, and it's
Yep.
just really hard to recreate that. But I definitely think there's like a U-shaped curve because I think like later in your career, I mean, I wrote an article about this a little bit ago, but I don't know, somewhere 2015, 16, all these companies have started copying Google's freaking open floor plan. And it was like this back rationalized thing just to reduce the operating costs like per square foot or like per employee. And then it was like back
No.
rationalized as like a collaboration or like productivity hack. But then we just put on headphones, and then like if you have to do deep work like an engineer like yourself, it's just like a freaking nightmare. And it's like, check out this cool echoey brick building that we have in Jackson Square or something, and it's just like
Yeah.
horrible. And so like I would really like to
Yeah.
see something in between where it's like bring back the half cubes or something that's like deadening.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
definitely think there's kind of cultural stagnation when it comes to tech in a lot of ways. Like I was hanging out with a
yeah.
friend of mine who works in like real estate finance a few months ago, and it was during the week, and he was picking up the phone and just like calling his coworkers. Like that
Hmm.
was like the primary motion of like interacting, and it was like, wow, like why don't we do that? Like it seems very
Hmm.
efficient. Like he's literally like just like getting on the phone and like doing a mid-year review with someone, and
Hmm.
like that was it. Versus in tech it's like schedule a Zoom meeting that's probably an hour long, and you know there's just like all this I don't know, ceremony involved, whereas they were just calling people up and not scheduling meetings, which is an interesting approach. But yeah, I would love to see more experimentation um, and new ideas in terms of how we work together in this world.
I think there's going to be like a pretty wide, if we do that Monte Carlo simulation of like where the productivity is going to end, it's going to be a big spread because one, I think something tech actually does really poorly is like we train employees, particularly on the sales side, non-technical side, like less than maybe like any other role. It's like unbelievable. Like, I wasn't a consultant. I don't think, you weren't either. But like if you talk to people that go to Bain or McKinsey, the amount of training they get for a job that they're only going to stay in for 2 years is like unbelievable. When I pivoted into management, like I think there was some like nominal course they put me in like 6 or 9 months later. But they were just like, oh, you're a top individual contributor. Like, good luck. Here you go. You figure it out. So I think
Yeah.
that kind of like blase attitude has been present with go to like when your management structure is just like prowling the aisles. You have to be like a little more intentional when it goes remote, and I think a lot of companies have really fallen short of that because they already don't have a culture of great enablement and training to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being in person, I think for people early in their career or learning a
Hmm.
new skill, uh, kind of has a built-in, training plan, which is just go sit with someone. Whereas, yeah, in the remote world, you have to figure out more formal ways to do that.
Okay. So maybe just kind of zooming out as we approach the close here, are there any like technologies, like companies or spaces that you're like particularly interested in right now? It could be ed tech or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, not. I wouldn't say there's. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of hype around AI and companies in that space right now.
I've heard about
I
this.
haven't.
Yeah.
I have not. I have not caught the AI bug. I'm a little bit AI skeptical, you might say.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of things that could happen in the ed tech space around that I think could be interesting. Obviously, ChatGPT has had like a huge effect on students and how they do
Hmm.
or don't do work. I think it'll be really interesting to see how uh, it ends up enabling kind of teachers and kind of the other side of the coin. Um, I think there's two worlds. There's one world where we try and like put it back in Pandora's box and like lock up AI and like restrict access to it in the educational space. But there's another world where I think it's a tool that everyone can use, and kind of we think of new ways of doing homework or lessons or tutoring or things like that that could be really interesting. But yeah, it seems like it's very early days, and from an engineering perspective, I'm AI skeptical mainly because it hallucinates a lot. It's just
Right.
like you give it one input, you get either the world's greatest output or complete trash.
Hmm.
And it's not deterministic what you're going to get. You don't know until you
Hmm.
do it.
Hmm.
So it's very difficult to engineer systems around that. So I think there's this whole problem of figuring out what how does that how do you utilize that in a product. The lazy way is you just make a chatbot.
Hmm.
But chat interfaces are not for everyone.
Totally.
So like, how does it actually get into a product in a way that's feels intelligent, feels like you're not, you're doing something that you couldn't do before. Um, I think that's the main challenge that there's no clear answer to right now.
Yeah, I think the success rate for putting it back in Pandora's box for any given general purpose technology has been approximately zero. So I don't know if that's going to work
Right.
for education, but the thing I'm pretty excited about in education is you've probably heard these studies where when people have like individual or shared tutors, like a really classical kind of like Aristotelian or
Yeah.
like classical education of a tutor motion instead of one to many. It's like a 2 or 3 sigma difference in terms of educational outcomes. And
Yeah.
the thing that is pretty exciting, hallucinations about, history lessons aside, that seems like it potentially could induce like a huge amount of leverage for people that do want to learn more or, really embrace that like educational journey. So,
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully they don't quash it in the ed space and pretend like rattling off 5 paragraph essays is the way to go still, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, so cool. So maybe we finish with a couple questions at the end here, but before I do that, is there anything in particular maybe you want to share with the audience or talk about before we pivot?
That's a good question. No, I don't think. I mean, yeah, I think we've covered a lot that hopefully is interesting. But um, yeah, it's hard to. I'm not a go-to-market professional, so I don't have great insights into what they want to hear.
No problem. No problem. So, okay. Closing question number one. What do you think has had a bigger or an outsized impact on your life, bigger impact on your life? Having a multi-$100 million exit or winning the state championship as a road bike racer for Ohio?
Oh man, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, I mean, cycling has been such a core like part of my identity for such a long time that it has definitely had an impact on me. So, whereas the exit is just numbers in a spreadsheet at the end of the day.
It's just money, man.
So yeah, I mean, cycling has been probably the bigger thing in my life. Just like learning how to suffer and enjoy it translates into a lot of different areas.
Absolutely. I think I personally do like my best thinking on the bike,
Yeah.
particularly when you've got some like really hard choice about personnel or just like a really hard trade off at work. It's just like going out there and like thinking about it for like an hour or two is pretty powerful for me.
Yeah, it's like it's meditation in a lot of ways. Go out and be alone with your thoughts for hours.
Some would say that's their worst nightmare, but yeah.
Meditation that can sometimes be interrupted by impacts on pavement and
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I know you mentioned at the beginning of the call, you've stepped back a little bit from a full time role at Clever. Do you have any idea of what you might want to do next, or kind of like a general sketch?
yeah, I mean, I think the general sketch, at least on the professional side, is find something that uh, is worth uh, dropping everything and going back to startup mode
Mm-hmm.
again, which is a pretty high bar. I think especially given my bias towards doing things in person and probably means traveling to SF a lot or some area that's not Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the professional next step. But really, it's been awesome to kind of step back, have a little bit of a sabbatical in some ways, and just be kind of more present with my kids, more less stressed around family. Kind of really strip away everything and see really what interests me and what I want to spend time on. And that's been a lot of riding my bike, a lot of like reading, and
Mm-hmm.
just like following my technical interests, regardless of whether they're relevant to the company and what we're working on. That's all been really, really enjoyable. And then just like being the on-call parent
Mm.
has taken a lot of time, but has been enjoyable. So um, yeah, I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and so there's this brief period of time where they enjoy hanging out with you and just making the most of that before they become angsty teenagers is has been nice.
Yeah, I empathize. I have a 3-year old and 1-year old, so we also are in it right now. So,
No, no.
okay, great. Well, final closing question, which I stole from Brian Chow from the New World podcast, which is one of my absolute favorites. What would you say is something that has too much order and needs more disorder? And what is something that has too much disorder and needs more order?
It's deep. I think I can think of one thing very clearly on the what has too much order front. Um, I've been reading. I'm kind of an urbanist
Mm-hmm.
on the side. Attend some city council meetings here in Cincinnati, trying to teach them the mistakes that San Francisco has made that I hope we don't repeat here in Cincinnati. And um, I would say, kind of in general, our built environment is
Mm-hmm.
like too stagnant. Like we have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of kind of status quo bias when it comes to what our neighborhoods look like, what our cities look like. Um, and this kind of resistance to change is kind of like embedded in our psyche in a lot of ways. So yeah, I would love to see more entropy in like uh, the physical world, what we're doing with uh, buildings and infrastructure. On the like, what has more too much entropy and uh, not enough order. Um, I mean, I think following a lot of my technical interests just freely has kind of or like underlined the fact that you know when it comes to just simply like building a website, there is way too many options out there. um, I think you know there's just like if you talk to any engineer, they'll talk about
Mm-hmm.
like the front end JavaScript ecosystem. Every
Mm-hmm.
year there's a new framework that is the hottest thing, whether it's React or Next.js or Remix, or like there's like an endless array of these tools that you can
And
use
then
to build
10
stuff.
times more dev tools to build it with.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like that XKCD comic where it's like, oh, like this standard doesn't solve my problem, so I need to create a new standard. Like there's this infinite loop of just reinventing stuff, and obviously it leads to a lot of innovation and kind of raising the bar for what these tools can do, but it does get exhausting at some point. And yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but less swinging back and forth between you know different things that engineers are excited about.
Great answer. All right. Well, with that, Raf, I think we'll bring it to a close. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Cool. Thanks, Stuart. It's been fun.